Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I'm glad to be back. This is Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, as always. And joining me this week, once again, is my good friend, Renee Johnston. How are you doing, Renee?
I'm good. How are you?
I am really psyched to have been able to put together a topic and get a guest this week after having fallen down on it 2 previous weeks in a row. So that's always nice.
I don't know how you do it, honestly.
Well, I really
literally life. I don't know how you do it. So I applaud that you get anything done.
It really helps me stay sane when I can do the show. I love talking to other people about what's going on. It gives me an intellectual outlet. It's like therapy for me almost.
Good.
It really helps me for the rest of the week. So that's the biggest reason that I do it.
All right, and you're right. I'm gonna watch the chat so that I can, see if people are asking more questions and all that good stuff. So when people see me doing this thing, it's because my computer is next to me.
That makes sense. And I usually try to watch the chat, but sometimes I'm more focused on the conversation, so I appreciate it when other people watch too. There we go. All right. And now that I've done the boring promotion stuff, so Cornel West is running for president.
Yes, he is.
And he's doing it, he says, with the People's Party.
So's the word.
Yes. And I have feelings. Other people have feelings.
Mm-hmm. I have lots of feelings.
I have lots of feelings too, and I want to talk about both of our feelings. But first, I want to say something up front, which is there's a real tendency to think like liberals in a lot of the online circles that I move in. And we like, and it's funny because everybody calls somebody else a liberal when they say something they don't like. And I mean, it's so easy that I'm sure I have done it myself, because people really do fall into those patterns. But it's funny that that's the go-to criticism of someone else of the day, when really it's the pattern that we all think in. One of these liberal thought patterns is the idea of a hero who we will vote for and who will save us by being elected. And it has to do with the idea of seeing presidents as heroes. We see people like Abraham Lincoln and FDR as these world historical figures who did great things, rather than as the head of a large bureaucracy who was influencing things at a specific time, but who was also influenced by the events around them and by the bureaucracy below them. I mean, we know that a lot of segregation that got ingrained into the way the federal government does things starts with the New Deal and the original Dixiecrats saying, hey, no, states have to have control over how this money is dispersed so that we can decide who gets it. And then it was when you started seeing all these challenges to these segregated ideas of separate but equal, and the idea that programs had to be integrated, that the government starts cutting them entirely.
Yeah. I got nothing. Yeah.
So, but we've got this idea that, and I'm not saying that that people shouldn't admire the successful qualities of FDR that achieved social reform at a time when social reform was desperately needed. I'm not trying to undersell the importance of the right people in the right places at the right time for history to happen is just, it's a lot more than just FDR. It's a whole socialist movement that was also pushing for more and was demanding that somebody do something. And FDR couldn't do nothing in the face of those demands. And that has to be considered too.
Right. So my big fight, I think, that is most frustrating for me about all of this is the reason people want an outside of the duopoly candidate is because they don't trust the duopoly, which I'm with them, right? Same. I feel all of that, right? Especially since I'm not I'm not a Democrat. I'm definitely not a Republican.
Yeah.
I don't want to participate in the duopoly either. So whenever people choose to run in any capacity, right? If they do so and they attach the D to their name, they're an automatic no for people. They're not even going to look into, they're not going to read what they have to say. They're not going to listen to them. They're not going to look at their platform. They're not going to look at their issues. Automatically, they're a no because they're a Democrat. You can't do anything with Democrats and yada, yada, yada.
There are people who have no criticism of Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. bigger than the fact that they're running on the Democratic primary.
So that means you are unable to separate the person from the party.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which, listen, you're right to do.
Now, I want to say for the record that I do not support either Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. for president. But there are deeper criticisms of both of them than the fact that they're running as Democrats.
Exactly. So what bothers me is these same people who have been making this exact argument for months now, and for years for some people, right, will now be like, oh, I don't really care if the People's Party sucks, right? Like, it's all about Cornel West, which, okay, like, if that's the route you want to take, that you don't think the party is relevant, you don't think all their stuff is important, you don't think the history of their massive failures in every which way, shape, and form are important, you think the person is more important than all of that. Okay. But that people don't see the contradiction in that, right, is the thing that annoys me. Like, okay, but you realize the exact thing that prevented you from even considering someone else is the argument for considering.
I mean, the idea that Cornel West should run for president because Nick Brana of the People's Party wants him to,
right,
is very much similar to the idea of certain Democrats that Hillary Clinton should be president because she was Hillary Clinton.
Right. Right. And, you know, for me, and I know we slightly differ in our views on Cornel West. Now, look, I deeply respect Cornel West. I feel like he's got some great historical stuff. He's an academic. He's brilliant.
Yes.
All of those things. I don't know that I would vote for him for president because I don't really know what he's campaigning on. Like, the website is sparse. Like, he doesn't really answer many questions clearly, in my opinion. So, you know, I'm withholding judgment on that part.
Sure.
Now, if he runs for People's Party, I'm definitely not going to do it because it's the same reason that I wouldn't vote for somebody just because. So that party association to me is important, right? So
I'm not voting for president.
Well, yeah, right now neither am I.
And I'm just saying that right now.
Referendum level. That's what I'm going to do.
No, I get you. No, I'm just saying right now, out front, I'm just going to say I'm not voting for president. I don't think in the current political climate it matters who's going to be president. It's going to be Biden or Trump. The conditions are not right for a miracle third party win. They should be. They should be right for a miracle third party win. That's what's so frustrating about all of this. But because of the way the media ties up perception of elections that that forces the conditions to be wrong for a miracle third party win.
Right. Now, I will vote for somebody for president if there is a third party candidate who I align with in a good way to get them that ballot access. You know, for example, and I know Green Party on the national level has a great deal of issues. I don't love everything that I'm seeing in the New Jersey State Party. However, I will say that they're making some effort to do something. They are running on local levels and in different places, things like that. If they had a candidate that I thought was, you know, reasonable and that I agreed with, and that, you know, I didn't see anything outlandish that I was in complete opposition of, I would then vote so that they could try and get state access to the ballot here in New Jersey. But outside of that, I don't see any reason. Valerie, good question.
Yes, I saw this, and as soon as I saw this asked, I wanted to bring this up. Does MPP have ballot access?
They do not. They do
exactly.
Not. And in the places where they are a recognized political party, they still cannot have ballot access in those places.
Here's where things are. Here's where things are fun, even if they did. So, in Washington, the Washington People's Party was registered and qualified for ballot access, which means they were in a position to start putting referendums on the ballot and start running candidates. However, the Washington People's Party is no longer affiliated with the national organization.
Correct.
The national they all left because the national organization gave them no support or guidance in running candidates or advancing referendums.
Correct.
And gave them no support for the referendums that they had in mind.
Correct.
So they separated themselves. They left. They're gone.
And when they finalized having that access in the state of Washington, it was under the separate organization. It has no affiliation whatsoever with the centralized People's Party that that's currently being.
So when people say, well, the People's Party has ballot access in Washington, it's no, the People's Party of Washington has ballot access in Washington. It is not affiliated with the state organization. And as Jersey Kate is saying here, I believe they've disbanded too.
Yeah.
They didn't. They needed. They were at the point where they needed to start getting money from a national organization to start doing things, and with with the People's Party doing whatever they actually do with their money instead of spending it on state parties. That was and yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And
so that means
Florida is a separate issue. They have minor party status in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
However, in order to have someone on the ballot, they have to be supported by a nationally recognized party. Because People's Party does not have that status, they cannot assist the state of Washington, the state of Florida, in getting someone on the ballot. They're still going to have the same problem of putting someone on there. What they could do, and this is, I wish Zana could have actually made it on, because I feel like she knows the rules better.
She does.
What they could do is Dr. West can run as an independent. He can associate himself with the People's Party under their banner. They can utilize what they already exist as to be a PAC, which would allow them to help, support him financially, which that's a whole other thing that I got to make sure I bring up. And then they can help him try to establish himself as an independent person running under the banner of People's Party and trying to gain ballot access across the country, because they do not have ballot access. And people, even in Virginia, where they are formed as a PAC, even though, the the people who did all that work walked away, but I don't believe the paperwork was pulled. I think it still exists as a PAC. But the Commonwealth of Virginia does not allow for a party outside of the Democrats and the Republicans. They only allow those two parties. Anything else can form as a PAC, and they can support an independent candidate, but they cannot have a ballot line as a political party because the Commonwealth of Virginia doesn't allow that.
Again, the People's Party of Virginia doesn't exist anymore. The leaders left the organization. They were harassed off the server for advocating for strong COVID mitigation measures.
Right.
And so even if there were some sort of ballot access out of that, that's another organization that's no longer affiliated with the national group.
Right.
And so for the national group to try to use that ballot access, it doesn't seem like that would work, even if it existed.
Right. And I noticed, so people also misunderstand like the ballot access and signature situation. I saw someone responded to Ole to say they just need to collect 675,000 signatures and they have a year and a half and they could get that done in a year and a half. And people don't understand how different the rules are from state to state. So you could easily count them all up and say, oh, it's only 670,000 signatures. Sure. But you also have to understand that there are certain states that have requirements for those signatures, right? So for example, funny enough, I pulled the list and I should probably pull it up so I can poke at any state that somebody may ask for. But in Virginia, there's a total number, but you have to have 400 signatures from each district in the state.
I know this. I know this from work I've done with candidates and being in the room for conversations about this. You want to know one of the reasons that every campaign has a lawyer is because in every state that has ballot access rules based on signatures, your opponents challenge your signatures and try to stop you from running in the first place. Right.
So that 675,000 really means you probably need to collect more like 1.5 million signatures.
Because if you figure they're gonna, if I have to collect, 600,000, that means you got to figure 200,000 are going to be removed when my idiot opponent challenges them in court. So now I need to have 200,000 more. So I really need 800,000. But if I have 800,000, then X will be removed when my idiot opponent challenges them in court. So I really need 1 million.
Right.
And so on.
Right. And the rules really are so, I mean, they're so varied from state to state.
So here in Oregon, the rules are all you have to do, even for presidential ballot access, is run as the recognized nominee of a party recognized by the state. So what that means is that when in the 2020 Green Party debacle over whether Howie was really the nominee or not, the Dario, the displeased loser of the Green Party primary process, was on the ballot in Oregon as the nominee of the Oregon Progressive Party, because they're a recognized party in the state. They're the oldest group. They're the oldest progressive. They're the oldest third-party progressive organization still intact on the state level from the radical days in the 60s when everybody was getting a state left-wing party of some kind. And they've been going strong ever since. Usually they nominate the Green Party nominee, but sometimes they do something weird. 2020 was one of those years, and they nominated Dario instead of Howie. Joe Kishore, who ran for the Socialist Equality Party, was only on the ballot in Colorado because in Colorado, all you have to do to get on the ballot is pay a filing fee. And anybody who pays the filing fee is now running for president. But that means the only electoral votes that you can possibly win if you're only on the ballot in Colorado or Colorado and Oregon is, the electoral votes of Colorado and Oregon. So by definition, you're only a spoiler.
Right. And in addition to that, who's in Oregon and Colorado helping you do this, right? Like, I mean, this has been my argument about People's Party from when they booted me out in the middle of the night in early 2020, is every time anyone with any attempt to actually organize within People's Party gets a little bit of traction, they find themselves on the outside looking in. So this means every time you have a group that's working towards actually achieving something, that group is removed or finds themselves needing to leave because they don't want to have this battle with, Nick Brana and the people who are on the Central Committee.
And this is consistent. It is consistent. You remember when we had the show on with my former co-host Alex, who was one of the original 2017 volunteers and was gone because the international group he was with was getting traction and was having successful talks with people. And Nick Brana was like, do whatever, dude, and kept ignoring it. And so they left.
Right. And there was a steering committee in 2018.
Yeah.
Tried to, say, like, let's do this the democratic way. Let's figure this out. And they got pulled into a meeting when they thought they were going to discuss how to move forward and told, like, Nick Brana's in charge. And if you don't like it, you got to go. So they all left.
Yeah.
Like, this is literally the cycle of this group over and over and over again.
And your story in 2020.
Right. Like, and I appreciate that, people want to get this thing done because it should happen, right? We should have more than 3 parties, in my opinion. There should be the ability to vote for real people and to have like a voice within your state of people who agree with the things that make the most sense in your communities and things like that. But to think that you're going to be able to navigate this in any real way with a group of people who have ultimately failed at every single task and thing that they have put forward.
So they've done 2 things. They've successfully gotten some C-list political celebrities to attend events, and they've collected money.
Oh, they're not so good at that.
But now,
let me know when you're ready for those numbers, because I did some digging.
I'm not saying they've collected lots of money, but they've collected money and nobody knows what's happened to it.
Right.
And that's really the thing. It's the money that the organization that collected money for the Rage Against the War Machine was a private corporation owned by Nick and the chairperson of the Libertarian Party.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what happened to that money?
Right.
Now,
and I figured out the other day in just my nosiness, because I was looking for something else. I can't even find any verification that they're actually a 501c4.
Well,
there's nothing.
Concerns me.
You've posted on a website where you're taking money from people that you're a 501c4. Where's the documentation for that?
Well, I have heard. I can't cite, but I have heard from sources that they are not good at following election laws. That when people with experience tell them, hey, this is actually illegal, you can't do it, they blow people with experience off and tell them they don't know anything.
Sorry, my husband just called me.
No. I was muted too, though, and so now I realize I'm not muted. Okay, so now that I'm unmuted, let me try to get my train of thought back. Yes. So it's with the question of money and where the money goes and what else is going on. It's there. We don't know if they're a 501c4. I do know from sources who I don't feel comfortable naming yet because they haven't gone on the record with me, but who I definitely will say have experience with election laws and have. I know that when people who know election laws tell Nick Brana, this is actually illegal, he says, you don't know what you're talking about, and does what he wants.
Right.
So with that attitude, who knows if they're a 501c4?
Right. The whole thing is just there's just so much shadiness behind it. And, I cannot blindly jump on board with any organization that is taking money from people. When I decided yesterday to go through their 2022 filings, because I was just like, let's just see. They are $73,630 in the hole for 2022.
Ooh, that's interesting.
They have overspent their donations by $73,630.
That's very interesting.
And the amount of money that they're spending on legal fees, thousands of dollars on legal fees. Nick Brana is taking a check regularly in the amount, if my math is right, I believe it's $3,500 a month. What they're paying him for is, I'm not sure. There are multiple people across the country who are also getting stipends to work for the People's Party.
Of course there are.
And I can appreciate that people are trying to make money and they're trying to make a living and they want to, to live, eat, and breathe and all that good stuff.
So even Lenin said that the vanguard should be a professional vanguard that gets paid to be revolutionaries.
Right.
So, you can make an argument that, hey, yeah, that's good, pure Lenin stuff. But, I don't think that Lenin would like these guys. It's just a feeling.
It's just, I have a disdain for people who use the money that they're given from people who are working and who are struggling, who are trying to get through to,
support their lifestyle,
to better their own situations without any real movement towards bettering the material conditions of working.
I have questions about how they always manage to find C-list political celebrities to show up at their events. There was something that raised question, to go back to the Rage Against the War Machine, where the producer affiliated with the Wu-Tang Clan made statements that he had been offered money in order to appear and speak, and the reason that he had pulled out was because that money was not paid.
Right.
Which raises the question, was he the only one who was offered money to appear? Right. Was he the only one who was not paid? Were any of the people who did show up paid for their appearances or to speak?
Right. I mean, we already know people were getting, flights in private jets, right?
Yeah, there was the picture, the annoying transphobe and racist Daniel McAdams and some buddy of his on their private jets going to the Rage Against the War Machine event. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, these are the working class people that the People's Party is allying with, the private jet.
And people really should just do a quick understanding of where Nick Brana lives, right? Because he's not struggling. He lives in his mother's basement, who lives in a gated community in Fairfax County, which is one of the richest counties in the country. And he's collecting a stipend to do whatever it is that he's doing. I don't have any, I guess besides
he's talking to Jimmy Dore a lot, apparently, or was. That relationship seemed to have soured at one point. He was talking to Chris Hedges a lot, though now supposedly Chris Hedges is trying to get Cornel West to talk to the Green Party and is sour, allegedly, on the People's Party.
But who knows? It happened when? In the last 4 days? Because he was the one with the big announcement, was he not?
Yeah, he was.
Even that,
that's weird.
Right. Although I can appreciate that he's like, oh, let me make a new connection. If that's how you felt 4 or 5 days after you made your announcement, what didn't you know 4 or 5 days?
What did Chris Hedges? What did Chris Hedges find
right,
out?
Right. You're a journalist, you're an educator, you're all these things. Like, there is nothing that came out in the last 4 or 5 days publicly regarding Nick Brand and the People's Party that was not already available prior to him deciding to write his Substack op-ed, where he was, supremely excited about this run of Dr. West with the People's Party. So
now,
I don't know what his story is. I've been done with Chris Hedges since he drew his red line with Oath Keepers, and then
then walked over it
on stage with them anyway. So I don't trust any of these people, and I don't know how to get people to understand that my issue with this. And I understand people have, like you've made some legitimate concerning statements regarding Dr. West as a person.
And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when we get through the People's Party. But on this point, I don't know if Chris Hedges is selling out for money. I think I feel guilty when I say this, because I know I'm pissing on people's heroes. And I don't want to piss on your heroes, but at the same time, you shouldn't have heroes. And this is why.
Right.
Because if you have heroes, eventually something will come out and you will feel like people are pissing on your heroes.
Right.
But anyway, so with Chris Hedges, I do not know if he is selling out for money. I believe that Chris Hedges believes he is absolutely in good faith and a sincere warrior for justice. I don't question his sincerity of motivation. I question lots of other things. I know from some study online and tracking some accounts and work that other people have done that the guy who runs Chris Hedges' social media is a right-winger. And so if his whole experience, because he doesn't do social media himself, he has a curated account that someone runs for him. And the person who runs his social media account for him is a right-winger, at least on issues like trans rights and crime and abortion. And with this in mind, you have to understand that Chris Hedges' entire engagement with social media and the internet comes through an employee whose political framework is uniquely different from Chris Hedges. Or is it? Is Chris Hedges also conservative on those issues? And that's why the guy who's running his social media accounts is. Now, with that in mind, this brings us to the transition that you just brought up. So let's go to the argument that it's about Cornel West as a candidate and not about the People's Party. Okay, I am willing to accept the idea that a charismatic leader can completely take over a political organization under the right conditions and move it in a new direction. That's something that absolutely can happen under the right conditions. The People's Party is not the organization where that can happen because Nick Brana owns it, but that's a whole different topic. We've addressed that topic pretty well with our discussion of the People's Party. So Cornel West is choosing to run with the People's Party. When asked why on Democracy Now!, his answer was word salad and suggested that he really didn't know what was going on with the People's Party as an organization. He was running for them because they asked him to run, basically. And he made a comment later about not running for the Greens because the Greens hadn't asked him, suggesting that he's running for president specifically because the People's Party asked him, which is a choice. It's a choice not to run unless asked. And it's a choice not to know what's going on with the organization. This is correct. He was a founding member. He was there in 2017 when they were founded. He wasn't very engaged.
Yeah,
but he lent his name to the organization in 2017.
And I just, if I'm going to tell, and listen, again, look, I'm not Cornel West, right? I obviously haven't written any books. I don't have a PhD. I didn't go to an Ivy League, blah, 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 right? But me as a regular person, I am never going to tell somebody that I'm a founding member of anything that I cannot answer questions about with
Yeah,
100% certainty, right? Like if you're a founding member, but you're on the outskirts and you have no idea that your organization is participating in all kinds of shady shit, like I wouldn't be claiming founding membership in
exactly.
that group. Like I'd be like, well, I was kind of around when it got founded, but I'm still learning things as we go. I also want to make it very clear, and this is something that disappoints me deeply about this situation. Cornel West was communicated with multiple times by
Yes,
multiple people in an attempt to make him aware of what was going on in that organization.
yes,
Okay. I can say this with 100% certainty because I was one of the people who found a gateway to him through his staff to provide him with information about what was going on in NPP when we were removed. The information was attempted to be provided to him, right? It is a choice to not gather and review the information that is given to you. Even if you
exactly.
don't think you're going to agree, even if you're going to push back, even if you're going to say, I just simply don't believe the accusations that are being made, you can do all of those things. But what you cannot do is say, oh, I didn't know. You didn't know
He
because you chose to actively ignore the information that was provided
and
to you. And that
and
is problematic.
and in that word salad, he also did kind of say, "Well, I don't believe the accusations," which is throwing people under the bus. And I can certainly understand why the people being thrown under the bus would have feelings about that.
Right.
I
Right.
know and am friends with the people that Cornel West was throwing under the bus when he sort of hinted that he didn't believe the accusations.
Right.
And I have heard them express that they have feelings about that, and you can't blame them.
No. And even the statement of like, I'm not gonna adjudicate this situation. Like, what look, what
That's
the fuck does
that's
that even
very
mean? Like
that's
that is
very
so
that's very impressive language to say.
I'm not
I
gonna
don't
decide.
I don't know what to believe, and I'm not going to find out.
Right. Like I don't even understand how when listen, and I believe the accusation, right? I'm
I
fully of
believe
the
the
belief
accusation.
that there was definitely some nastiness going on, but I also don't like Nick Brandis, so I can also firmly state that part of that is because I don't like him and I don't trust him, right? So, I have no problems being very clear about my position on this. That said, right? Even if you don't believe the accusations, right? You should still, in the back of your mind, be like, that's weird though, that like he kicked out half of his board, including people who had been with him from the start,
Yeah.
because he wanted to avoid even having a full-fledged finalized investigation of the accusation.
Yes.
Like there's so many pieces to this that in my opinion are problematic and that shouldn't be overlooked, not by Cornel West and not by the people who are supporting him and not by the people who just want
And
to finally say, oh, well, they're trying to start a third party. You have to be able to really look at these things and make an honest decision with yourself about why you want to keep moving in this direction. And if your decision is that you simply don't care that in 1 year this organization overspent by over $73,000, if you want to say I don't care that there's all this messiness with sexual harassment and sexual assault that's in the background that happened that resulted in people getting thrown out, why? If you want to ignore that they've went through multiple cycles now of removing people, if you want to ignore the anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, if you want to ignore the fact that they really are anti-black, and I don't care what anybody says, that's my experience with them. If you want to ignore all of that and say, I just really like Cornel West, like, okay, like you can go.
But then the question becomes, if we're talking about Cornel West on a personal level, why has he chosen to not
that
and still choosing to run with the People's Party. And here's the personal level again, let's talk about his business associations, because this bothers me.
Yes.
He is a member of an academic advisory board for a corporation that publishes what is called the Classics Learning Test. The Classics Learning Test is an alternative college admissions test for the ACTs and SATs that has been adopted for admissions by about 200 schools, most of whom are conservative private Christian colleges, some of which are conservative Black private Christian colleges, which has to be understood in the context of the fact that Dr. West is the chair of Union Theological Seminary and is a clergyman whose approach to politics and revolution very much comes from the Black church. Now, the board of this, the test very clearly favors graduates of private Christian high schools over public school graduates. Now, this is classist in the first place because people who go to private Christian high schools are more likely to have money than people who don't. It has racial implications because even if we're going just by the class element, Black people are racialized as a class, and as a result of that racialization, Black people are assumed to be middle class if they are ruling class, working class if they are middle class, and criminal class if they are working class, and so on down the chain. And this is a function of the way class and race interact in America. A Black person will always be treated as if they are of a lower class than they actually are in any American class hierarchy. The best example of this is Black entertainment mogul Byron Allen not getting his comedy network on Comcast, despite the fact that it's not even a particularly Black comedy network. Have you ever watched Byron Allen's comedy network? So number one, it's a lot. It really is worth watching if you really like the sort of banal, chummy celebrity TV comedy stuff of the 70s game show culture. If that's your kind of comedy, you will love Byron Allen's network. It's great. If that's your thing, you will love it. And the people who he has on are a broad range of comics, from the Howie Mandels to folks who were recently on shows like America's Got Talent. But it's not particularly Black. There's a lot of white people on these shows. But he's not being discriminated against because it's a Black network. He's being discriminated against because he's a Black billionaire.
Right.
But at the same time, he's not being discriminated because he's doing anything revolutionary on the class or racial level to help either poor people or Black people. He's just being discriminated against for being a Black billionaire in the entertainment business.
Right. And this is where, I say this a lot. People, unfortunately, because I'm a firm believer that all skin folk are not kinfolk, people who have a proximity to whiteness and who have ventured into whatever path, entertainment, what music, whatever, right, that has allowed them to move forward in class status, and it is in part because of that proximity to whiteness, always fail to understand that proximity to whiteness does not make you white. It does not free you from the bounds of your melanin level. And unfortunately, a lot of people have to learn the hard way that your proximity to whiteness will never, ever save you from being Black. Ever. there's always going to be a point in which you are going to be faced with something that you thought you were going to be able to avoid because of your proximity to whiteness.
Well, I mean, name
is always a hard one.
With the possible, well, no, even Oprah doesn't have a monopoly. There is no black billionaire who has monopolistic control of their industry the way a handful of white billionaires have monopolistic control of big tech or big pharma.
Correct. There's always something that is not black in the background, and people need to understand that. Dr. Jared Ball, who, and I hope I don't ruffle anybody, he has that second version of his book that just came out, The Myth of Black, and I'm gonna mess up the name, but he has a new book out. It's all over his Twitter page if anybody wants to look for it. So I have learned a lot by listening to his show, because he talks a lot about this misconception that there's like this way to save black people through a financial system that was set up via colonialism, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really, really like very, very, very like vague and short version of basically what the story is. And I really encourage people to watch a lot of what he talks about and to read the book, because this for me was something that I really fully needed to understand. Like, I fell for the Greenwood Bank gig, right? Because I was super excited about the idea that there was going to be this black bank, and it turns out it's not a black bank, right? Like, yeah. These are things that happen.
Well, so the first question is
this myth of black buying power and black capitalism and all these things. It's always going to be within the system, which means also it's allowed to happen, which means it's not.
What has historically happened to real black banks?
Right, they don't exist anymore.
I mean, and there's a reason that they don't exist anymore. They were historically targeted and destroyed by white banks or white racists.
Right.
Which is interesting, how white racists are always essentially defending white capital from black competition when they do those things.
Right.
Because, and I'm not trying to downplay, in no way am I trying to downplay racial hatred, but it is important to understand that the racial outrage of the white middle class is directed at the idea of a black middle class even existing.
Right.
And so events like Black Wall Street are targeting black capitalists specifically, as opposed to working class black people.
Right.
These racial outbreaks are based on the racialized class anxiety of middle class white people losing their status because of middle class black people.
Right. And historically in this country, and it's something that I think people really fail to understand, is racist white people will fuck themselves to make sure that black
yes.
So like this idea that like, there's a way forward with these people who literally will destroy everything to make sure that black people can't access it. Like, so
welfare in the South was a segregated system controlled by Dixiecrats as a form of patronage. And when they could no longer discriminate against black people and run it as a system of patronage, they started destroying their own welfare systems.
Right. It's just like closing the pools, right?
Exactly.
Oh, wait, we gotta let the black people swim? Just close them. Just shut them all down. We just won't have pools, right?
And
like, this is a real thing that exists and happens, that people just, I'm like, you all act like, and people act like this was hundreds of years ago. This happened in my mother's lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this was not like.
I did, this is something I did the other day. And I can't remember all the names connected, but it's a great example. Frederick Douglass was alive during the Civil War and was there for the end of chattel slavery and the end of Reconstruction. His youngest son, Joseph, was a musician and a composer, and taught at a musical conservatory. One of his students, whose name is not in my head right now, I can't remember it at the moment, and I'm upset about that. One of his students was a famous Black composer who died in 1960. My parents were alive in 1960.
Right.
So my parents were alive when a Black composer who studied the violin under Frederick Douglass's younger son died.
Right. We're not that far removed from, and honestly, we're not, in my opinion, we're not removed at all. So
now, and
I'm in the New York, New Jersey area,
yep.
as you know.
And
I grew up in New York. I listened to WBAI. There was a gentleman who got on WBAI the other day and started talking about, people need to let go of history and all these things that happen. These things didn't even happen in their lifetime and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Didn't Ahmaud Arbery just get chased down?
He did.
Killed
he did.
By a group of white people who decided they didn't like him running in their neighborhood?
Yeah.
This was my son who is 13.
Yeah.
That, right? Like, we're not far enough removed from any of it to pretend as if that history is not still relevant.
Exactly. Right? And let's just look at what was happening in 1960 when our parents were alive. 1960 right. is before all the big successes of the civil rights movement.
Right.
I mean, the main success of the civil rights movement at that point was integrating the military and starting to integrate schools in the South.
Right.
So this is before all of the things that we think of as the civil rights movement even happening. This is the Jim Crow era.
Right.
So now when I think about this, it occurs to me that because the school that my wife went to, I mean, not my wife, my mother, the school that my mother went to was in Virginia and was a private church-run school that was desegregated very specifically because they were against segregation.
Right.
My wife, my mother, I don't know why I keep calling my mother my wife. That's so very Oedipal. My mother was one of the very few people who went to college in Virginia at the time she did who wasn't going to a segregated college.
Right.
Because remember, desegregating the University of Virginia system was later in the 60s from 1960.
Right. Right. And my mother, who came here as a teenager, was in New York when the teachers went on strike because they didn't want Black people to play a role in their children's education. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not far removed from these things. And this idea that they're not entwined and you know this, it really, really bothers me. It really bothers me. And I can't get past how easily people dismiss that the problems are not historical problems, right? Mm. The things that still happen. So, and of course, even more, we always do. We've gone like
history
completely awry from where
we have, and I'm going to go back to that board because I got way off that original topic. But this is good because history is one of the issues with this board,
right?
And it ties in. Apparently, RBN just tweeted West couldn't be racist because he was one of the inventors of CRT.
All right. So one, that's my understanding is that's actually, I don't believe
he is not. Cornel
yeah,
West,
I'm like,
to my understanding, Cornel West has never taught anything but theological courses. He is a clergyman and a seminary professor. The reason for his great moral status is because of his position as one of the foremost Black Christian scholars of his era, blah, blah, blah. So he draws his authority from his status as a religious figure, a religious thinker, an expresser of moral ideas. He's not someone who has been involved in the high-end law school curriculum that CRT represents.
Right. And, this... I really like having these conversations about like Black people being racist because
without getting, I hate to cut you off, but I'm trying to keep us on topic this time because this is where we This is where we jumped
go.
off before. When we're talking about CRT, it is important to understand that this classics learning test favors people from private Christian schools over public schools. So, question number one. What did they call private Christian schools in Mississippi and Florida in 1960? Segregation academies. Why? Because what did we say was one of the few successes of the civil rights movement that had happened in 1960? Desegregating the public schools,
right,
or at least some of them. In response to desegregating the public schools, white people opened really cheap private schools under the auspices of evangelical and Catholic churches so they could keep black people out.
Right.
And they called these schools segregation academies. This Covington Christian School in Kentucky that's been in the news several times for all sorts of bad reasons started out as one of those segregation academies back in the day.
Right.
So you, the lady who won the Senate seat in Mississippi, one of her scandals was, oh yeah, she went to a segregation academy when she was a kid, and everybody in Mississippi is like, is that really a scandal though? They all did.
Right. Right.
And so I don't know that affected anything one way or the other. But so we're talking about CRT, we're talking about this group. So the classics learning test privileges a mostly white and mostly more affluent student body over a black and working class student body that goes to public school. So that's number one. It favors the wrong people in the testing process. It doubles down. I mean, one of the reasons we need alternatives to the SATs and the ACTs is because they were designed by middle-class white educators with a middle-class white view of society. So how is something that favors private Christian school students who are more likely to be white and affluent an improvement in the right direction?
Right.
So there's that. It is fun. Not only is he not one of the people who founded CRT, he is supporting an educational program that is itself against the principles of CRT, and he could be considered affiliated with the anti-CRT movement. And here is why.
Right. And I don't even know if considered is, I mean, look, people can get mad at me, but the affiliation, in my opinion, is very clear. There's no assumption about it. There is a clear and distinct. And
this is
you explain it to the people.
So we're talking about a test that favors a mostly white, mostly more affluent student body from white Christian private high schools. So with that in also, to a certain extent, middle class, upper middle class, and favored working class students attending black private Christian high schools. Let's not forget that class matters in the black community, and that these divides can make a difference in how people see history. There have always been two versions of the Black Academy. There has been the Black Academy that seeks to stake out an academic body of work based on black experience. And then there is an academy that is just sort of black people in the white academy, making the white academy more diverse and more multicultural without really challenging the white academy. Yes, Dr. Cornel West was denied tenure at Harvard. Yes. However, he was then granted tenure by Union Theological Seminary, which is exactly part of the same white establishment as the other Ivies.
And am I incorrectly remembering that Harvard tried to back down on that?
It was complicated. Harvard didn't want to look bad.
Right.
And their original reason for not giving him tenure was not wanting to look bad with their rich alma mater, with their rich alumni.
Mm-hmm.
And then as that started to blow up in their face, they didn't want to look bad to their current student body and their current student body's parents.
Right.
And so they had all sorts of issues walking it back and forward. But the upshot of it is he did not stay with Harvard. He went to Union Theological Seminary.
Correct.
But this was an issue with him quarreling with one portion of the white establishment over the issue of Palestine, and finding a segment of the white establishment that would then accept his positions on Palestine. This is not, he did not go to Morgan State or Xavier.
Right.
Of course, he wouldn't go to Xavier because he's a Protestant and not a Catholic, but you still get my point. He did not go to some black Christian school and stake out his anti-establishment position.
Correct.
He went to another. He went from one portion of the white establishment to another.
Right. All right. So go back to making the connection.
So our classics learning test is already. It's promoting the Western canon, the classics. What a bunch of people. Now, race was more complicated during the classical period than it is now. And so people of that period did not divide things up into white and black the way that we do now. There was this much more complicated, not less chauvinist or less racist, but much more complicated way of deciding what race people were. A lot of it was based in language and where people lived. But the whole point, it was a more complicated situation. Race was seen differently. It meant something different. This classical period, these people did not think of themselves as white. But when people talk about the Western canon, it is perceived as white because it is perceived as European culture. The reason that we talk about Greek philosophers and not the Egyptian and Babylonian philosophers that they stole their shit from is because the Greek philosophers were perceived as European by the European curators of knowledge, and the Babylonians and Egyptians were therefore less than the Greeks who refined and improved their ideas, ignoring the fact that the ideas they refined and improved were stolen and appropriated. Now, you can say, well, that the fact that they refined those ideas and spread them around the whole world matters. And yes, it does. But they were still appropriated, and they were appropriated by people who believed that their language was superior to the rest of the world, and that people who didn't speak Greek were barbarians. And the term barbarian comes from the notion that people who don't speak your language are scary and dangerous.
Right.
So, but this is the attitude. We have the racial division now instead of the linguistic division, but the linguistic division has survived within the racist division,
right,
as a symbol of that racism. And so you've got this whole support of the Western canon is inherently suspicious in and of itself when taken into the context of American education. For example, Cornel West's first article on the subject of the classics learning test was critical of Howard University for taking Homer off the curriculum. Now, they didn't take Homer out of classical literature courses or anything like that. If you go to Howard University, you take a classics class, you're still going to learn Homer. No, what they did was they replaced a history and literature class that was all about Homer with a history and literature class that was all about Black American writers. And they did this with the notion that for people in America, Black American writers might be more educationally relevant for a class of their own to students attending a Black college with an interest in Black culture. And therefore, we're not going to dump Homer from our curriculum entirely, but we're going to replace these Homer classes with these classes about Black American literature and how it interacts with history and the way Homer interacted with history. And what we get from Cornel West and the CEO of the testing company, whose both names on the byline
of that article as well.
That article as well. This one was in the Washington Post, and this makes me wonder. So there are two ways that people are on the byline. The first is the ghostwriter. The actual writer puts their name on the byline, but the person whose name is on the byline is the one that is supposed to be there too.
Okay.
And the person who does the work has to be given credit, but the co-author is supposed to be seen as the real author. I don't think this is one of those cases. There's also the situation where somebody is paid to put their name on an article mostly written by someone else after criticizing and editing it in order for their name to be used in connection with the article.
Okay.
Is this a case of this guy wanted to publish his articles about the classics with Cornel West's name in order to not appear racist?
Wouldn't be the first time.
So that raises that question.
Now, real quick question: are there only that article and the one that just released, or is there more than the two?
Well, there's articles that the CEO has written on his own under his own byline without Cornel West. Okay. The articles that I know of for certain and have read are these two. The one in the Washington Post was about Howard University. It is slanted. It talks about them taking Homer off the curriculum and does not accurately reflect what happened.
Okay.
And it's targeting a Black university for teaching Black history without saying so.
Right.
So that raises some questions right there. And then you take in the more recent article in May praising Ron DeSantis's revolutionary educational program in Florida, which has been fueled by the anti-CRT panic and the anti-grooming panic targeting queer people.
Right.
And on top of this, the guy who wrote both of those strategies, Christopher Rufo, sits on the board with Cornel West for the CLT test. Right. So you've got a test that in and of itself tends to support a white supremacist status quo, more so than existing standardized tests that are already seen as racist by some Black educators. You have Cornel West associating his name with this test and associating his name with articles written by the test's publisher, attacking schools for privileging Black American literature over Homer, and praising Ron DeSantis for privileging Homer over Black history and queer history. So when you keep all of this in mind, then this raises the question, is Cornel West part of the anti-CRT movement? And is Cornel West a TERF?
Right. And it's a question you've gotten a lot of slack for asking.
I have. People have been going after me for the TERF question.
And I'm not, I'm a firm believer that it's always reasonable to ask questions, right? I'm not knowledgeable enough I'm just not knowledgeable enough to make
I know that Dr. West has been a historic supporter of the rights of gay men in specific situations. I know that he has spoken out in the past in very specific situations as an ally of the queer community, but I haven't really heard. I don't know if I've ever really heard him speak on trans issues specifically.
And I don't know for sure, honestly. Here's my.
But when he praises,
here's my.
Sorry.
My issue is if you allow yourself to be associated with people who are clearly in line with things that are counter to anything that you have done historically, what is going on? And it is worth asking that question. I'm a firm believer that silence is complicity, right? If you previously spoke on a matter and it was in support of the basic human rights of any group, and then you suddenly become silent on those basic human rights of any group, but yet you are aligned, and I use the word aligned intentionally because if you are sitting on the board with someone who praises himself as the person who designed the way to attack CRT, right? That is an alignment, right?
Other people on the board include the president of the Heritage Foundation,
right, which is another mess, right?
And this is one that my friend Connor Exum of Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Newsletter, who we popped up on the screen before, found. Another one of the people on the board is an interesting Catholic podcaster who does a show that is based all around defending the truth and beauty of Western culture. Now, there is a thin line between doing a podcast defending the truth and beauty of Western culture and being the kind of Western chauvinist that the Proud Boys call themselves. And we all know who the Proud Boys are.
Right. And at what point does someone say, like, how many of these associations are you going to have that you are going to act like you don't really fully understand what the association means from the outside? Because that's a relevant question. As I've said, Dr. West is an intelligent man, right? He's learned, he's doctored, he's all those things. That means he can read, right? That means if someone has presented information that is readily available for public consumption, he also has access to that same information.
But then here's where the problem is. I'm a smart person. You're a smart person. Speaking as a smart person yourself, do your worst mistakes come from you thinking, I'm not a smart person, I better double check my sources? Or do your worst mistakes come from, I'm a smart person, I know this?
Right.
And so nobody's stupid like smart people. Because if we really think we know this, we might not check our sources the way we should.
Right.
So I can easily see Cornel West thinking, well, I know blah, 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 and not checking sources because he thinks he knows.
And then that brings the question, okay, so there's that, right? But from the outside, when you look at that,
yes,
right, that should bring two issues to mind. Right? It should either bring but why didn't you look?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, why didn't
What is the number one reason your lawyer doesn't want to know the full truth about the crimes you're accused of?
Right. They don't want to know, right?
Exactly.
And so the second question then is, what does this mean that you didn't want to know? Because for me, if I am going to follow along and support somebody, I want to follow along and support somebody who wants to know, right? Like, I want to be on the side of the person who is doing so much research and so much investigation and so much background checking that they're fully aware of what they're associated with. I don't want to be with the person who says, oh, well, I didn't know. Because why didn't you know? And why didn't you try to find out? That's my problem.
If everybody's telling the truth and Cornel West is completely above suspicion, then why didn't he know?
Right.
And all of a sudden,
look to find out, because everybody, people who chose to know,
yeah,
they know, because none of this is secret information.
This is stuff that all this came out immediately upon him announcing his candidacy, right, because it's so easy to find.
Right.
There are really nasty bad faith attacks on Cornel West and his candidacy on both MSNBC's website and in The Nation. But the facts supporting these biased and malicious conclusions are all correct.
Right.
And nothing nothing supports a false accusation, a false and biased and exaggerated accusation like true facts.
Right. Right.
And so, because the natural question is, we talk about this all the time. It comes up in some context on the internet at least once a day, but it's that old question. You got a table. You got 10 people at the table. 9 of them are Nazis. How many Nazis are at the table?
All of them.
Exactly. And this is where we're now raising the question. Is Cornel West going to get up and get away from the table that he's sitting at with the Nazis, or is he going to stay there?
Right.
And then people, you're calling Cornel West a Nazi. It's like, I'm not calling Cornel West anything. I am saying that Cornel West's behavior is not in tune with these standards that we bandy about on a daily basis.
Sorry, my husband's calling me again.
Of course.
You keep going. Tell them the truth.
So with that in mind, with the fact that Cornel West's behavior is not in tune with some of these basic standards, we're not talking about purity testing. We're not talking about, well, is he where we want him to be on healthcare, or is he where we want him to be on labor rights? We're talking about, is Cornel West a TERF? Is Cornel West part of the anti-CRT movement because he is on a board with the person who did the strategy for both the TERFs and the anti-CRT movement? He's putting his name on op-eds that are critical of teaching Black history or teaching queer history without coming out and saying that they are critical of teaching Black history and queer history. And let me talk to you now seriously as a white person who pays attention to other white people and studies them and tries to warn folks about some of them. Nobody who defends Homer as part of a high school and college curriculum is defending Homer because they love Homer. Most of these white Christian conservatives defending Homer have read the Cliff Notes of Homer and have not actually read the Iliad or the Odyssey. They have a very superficial idea of Homer that comes second and third hand, exactly the way their very superficial idea of the Bible comes from their preacher. So we're not talking, when we talk about the movement itself and the people who are advancing this movement, we are not talking about people who just love Homer so much that they want everybody to have a chance to study Homer. Nobody is stopping you from studying Homer if you really want to study Homer. What these people want is to use Homer to attack Zora Neale Hurston.
Right.
And that's just one example. That's what comes to mind right off the top of my head.
To remove her from the list of books that should be read.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
well, I mean, and these are the same people who are banning books.
Right. Like, let's not forget all of these people are actively participating in a mission to remove Black people from the discourse, to remove their books, to remove their voices, to remove our history. Like, I'm so, even right now, I'm in the middle of a conversation with people who are like, but it's Cornel West. And I'm like, he's going to justice and accountability. I'm like, he's running with a group for which he is not seeking justice and accountability. So you can go with that. You can absolutely go with that if that's what you want to do, but acknowledge the reality of the fact. Because when this does not go well, and I should add an if when, just for the sake of understanding that I don't know everything. I have no idea what's going on within that group. Maybe they have a plan, right? There's like a 0 to 1% chance that they know what they're doing and they manage magically to get together, right? We can't forget and ignore the reality of this situation. This group does not have ballot access. they are not a national political party. They don't have people all over the country in various states where they have things set up appropriately in order to help anyone run for anything, right?
They have staked out pro-cop, anti-black, and anti-queer positions on what they call identity politics.
Right. Like their whole mission is about something that I cannot support. So I, as a person who is able to read and pay attention, am not going to just jump and support the front man just because I like the front man and I feel like historically he's been in the right place.
And then,
that to me is not enough.
And Johnny quotes something that I have been seeing some variation of since this topic came up. Obviously, he knows what he's doing. I fully trust him and won't question any of his decisions.
Right. And how silly is that?
So
right? How stupid is it? Say, like, I'm just going to blindly follow somebody without asking questions.
In retrospect, aren't there people Bernie shouldn't have trusted, that people were like, oh, I trust Bernie, so I trust the people Bernie trusts in retrospect, and we realized that was not right?
Right. I just don't, this whole situation is really, it's very disheartening for me, because what essentially has happened is the very thing that has pushed people away from the duopoly. They're falling into a trap with another group because they like the person that has become the front man.
Yes.
And I just can't get on board with that. It's not what I do. I have no interest in
that. And really,
I wrote a couple of days ago, I left the Democratic Party because I did not want to be a sheep. I'm not going back to be a sheep just because the person who's at the front.
And someone mentioned, I'm going back here. There it is. This is Johnny too. There are other issues as well, since we're back on the topic of the People's Party. Nick shouldn't be leading his campaign and the party as well. Party leaders step down to campaign for candidates.
But Nick has always historically done whatever Nick wants to do.
Of course.
And so, again, we're back to the same question of, at what point do you look at the reasonable issues that are happening behind the scenes of this announcement and make a decision? And if you want to say, I just like Cornel West and I don't care about the rest of the stuff, then okay. But, a year and a half from now, when you're scratching your head and trying to understand what happened, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be big time with the I told you so's. My petty is going to fully come out. And I will also eat my work. Like, listen, if they manage to magically make it work and he gets on the ballot and he gets 5% and they end up being a party, I'll say, okay, you know what? I was wrong. I did say at the time that I didn't know everything and maybe there was some magic that was going to happen that was going to pull out. I was wrong. So I don't mind being wrong if the facts correct me. What I don't like is for people to like hound on me and to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about.
And that's really the thing.
Questions based on facts and reality.
Because that's really the thing. What are the people jumping on to attack people for raising questions defending? They're not. They seem to be defending. They seem to be defending their image of Dr. West.
Right.
I usually don't talk about other shows on mine. But I had someone tell me, well, didn't you watch Dr. West's interview with Savvy Sabs? He explained everything.
No, he didn't. It was the same mealy-mouthed explanation that he gave on Democracy Now! And I appreciate that people think that just because he answered and didn't say, oh, I'm not answering that question or whatever have you, that's sufficient. But he still to date has not acknowledged the real problems within this party. And if he's just going to go along, then okay, that's his right to do. But it's also my right as a person and as a voter to question that decision.
And then that raises the question. Okay, so he addressed it on Savvy Sabs. The way he addressed it on Savvy Sabs was exactly the same language that we would have criticized if he was running as a Democrat.
Right. The whole thing is very frustrating. I don't know. And my husband's about to come in, so I'm going to have to quickly jump off when he walks in the door. Of
course. No, I'm going to go ahead and this is a good time for us to wrap and for me to give my closing monologue anyway. So.
All right.
Well, I'll
So
go ahead.
thank you for letting me participate.
Thank you so much for joining me.
We'll keep going, and we'll just tell the truth, and then whatever happens will be what happens.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend, Renee.
All right, Chris, take care.
All right, folks, I want to thank Renee again for joining us. I want to thank everybody who's been watching. And, you know, I'm going to address this one. I'm not going to tell anybody how they should vote, no matter where they live, swing state, whatever. I understand the position that living in Virginia, you feel you have to vote against the Republicans so that they don't get the electoral votes. And that makes absolute sense, especially at the state level where you can't let Republicans take over the state machinery to discriminate against people. But the problem is that on the federal level, it really doesn't matter who's president. Yes, you can make an argument that a Republican president might do more malicious things to hurt people. But when the Republican president does malicious things to hurt people, that's when Democrats will oppose him. When he's in office and is doing malicious things to try to hurt people, that's when you actually might get Democrats to stop them. The problem is that when Democrats are in office and Republicans are doing something malicious on a state level, then Democrats write off that state and say, we can't do anything. That's West Virginia, or that's Arkansas, or that's Kentucky. We can't do anything down there. We're helpless. And then they just wash their hands and blame voters. And that doesn't actually help. So I don't know that the idea that the Democrats actually winning the presidency does make people safer. I think it makes people in red states more vulnerable because they're not going, even more vulnerable because they're not going to get any federal protection. You're not going to be able to mobilize any federal action with against serious racist policy at the state level in the federal government without a Republican for the Democrats to oppose. It's just depressing, but true. Now, that said, I think that for all the problems of Virginia Democrats, I think Virginia Republicans taking over is a disaster. And you want to get Youngkin out of there. You want to get the Democrats to nominate someone who isn't Terry McAuliffe to run for office. And you want to be able to clean out the corporate Democrats. But at the federal level, you have to play ball with the people who donate money to the federal party to even get a seat at the table. So it doesn't matter how you run or how you're elected. Once you're in office at the federal level, you're stuck doing the bidding of the people who donate money to the national party. If not immediately, then within a couple of terms. And then we really have to think what is necessary to make change. And it's not voting for president. What's necessary to make change is to actually organize to make change. And this is the hard part. Organizing to make change isn't organizing to vote. It might be part of it. You might want to vote in city council elections and school board elections. You might want to run for city council or school board. That could be really important right now at the local level as states become more racist. But you can't just focus on elections. You have to mobilize large-scale civil disobedience where people don't go to work. People don't buy shit from capitalists. We need to be able to organize a mutual aid economy to deprive capitalists of our money. We need to be able to go on strike to deprive capitalists of our work. Those are the only ways that we can hurt capital. We're not going to hurt capital at all by electing a different president. That different president will still have to deal with the dictatorship of capital when they are president. We have to think in terms of cultural change. And cultural change happens in your conversations with people in your life, in your neighborhood, in the interactions that you have with people online. Cultural change is something that has to be worked for at a deep level every day. And with nobody willing to do that work, nobody willing to build that revolutionary culture, we just get caught in the same traps over and over again. And that's what I want to lead you with. Think about how you can help spread that revolutionary culture and that revolutionary thinking. Thank you. And I hope you guys have really enjoyed the show this week. I will tweet at you. Have a great Sunday.